The quiet hum of the grocery store was shattered when a young cashier, Olivia, raised her voice at an elderly veteran named Mr. Harris. He had just presented his military discount card at checkout, only for Olivia to scoff and question why he deserved special treatment. Shoppers paused, uncomfortable as Mr. Harris remained calm, though his weathered face revealed quiet pain. Just as tension filled the air, a stranger nearby took an unforgettable stand, one that would change everything. The steady beeping of the grocery store's scanners had faded into an uncomfortable silence. All eyes turned toward the checkout lane, where Olivia, a young cashier with sharp eyes and a rigid stance, was glaring at Mr. Harris. The veteran stood quietly, his hands resting on the handle of his cart, a few groceries neatly lined on the belt before him. His military discount card, slightly worn around the edges, lay in front of the register, untouched. "Sir, do you really think it's fair to get special treatment just because you wore a uniform?" Olivia's voice cut through the silence, laced with skepticism. Mr. Harris blinked, clearly taken aback, his lips pressed together, but he remained calm. "I serve this country, miss," he said softly. "This discount isn't a reward. It's a small token of appreciation for those who sacrificed." Olivia's arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Sacrificed? So you went to war and got a paycheck. Meanwhile, single moms are working 2 jobs to survive and don't get handouts like this." The words hit hard. A few gasps rippled through the crowd. Some shoppers exchanged wide-eyed glances, while others shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to react. Mr. Harris inhaled slowly, keeping his composure. "Miss, I don't expect anything. I simply showed my card as its store policy. I'm not here to take anything away from others." But Olivia wasn't backing down. She shook her head, voice rising. "This country glorifies war while ignoring the real struggles people face every day. Why should you get special privileges when my cousin came back from deployment and can't even find work? What makes you more deserving than him?" The tension thickened, pressing against the walls. A mother standing in the next aisle pulled her young son closer, whispering, "It's not right to speak to him that way." Jake, a middle-aged man standing just behind Mr. Harris, in line, narrowed his eyes as he watched the confrontation. His fists clenched slightly, but he remained silent for now, studying the situation carefully. Mr. Harris, still calm but visibly wounded, offered a quiet response. "I'm sorry your cousin is struggling, miss. Many who serve face hard times afterward. I've seen it myself. But this discount? It's not about privilege. It's about remembering those who didn't come home." His voice cracked slightly on the last words, but Olivia, either missing the vulnerability or ignoring it, scoffed. "Words don't pay bills, sir." The crowd felt frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let the scene play out. Olivia's voice, though harsh, seemed fueled by something deeper: pain, frustration. But her words stung nonetheless. Suddenly, Jake cleared his throat and stepped forward. "I think you've said enough," he said, voice steady but firm. The room's attention shifted toward him as he prepared to do something that no one would forget. The air felt thick, charged with discomfort, as Jake's words echoed through the quiet store. Shoppers remained frozen, glancing between Olivia and Mr. Harris. The soft buzz of the fluorescent lights seemed louder than before, amplifying the tension that clung to the room. Olivia's face flushed as she glanced toward Jake, her defiant posture faltering for just a moment. But the sting of being challenged made her double down. "And who exactly are you?" she snapped, her voice shaking but still sharp. "Why are you defending him? This isn't about respect. It's about fairness. Some people get praised for serving, while others work just as hard and get nothing in return." Jake held her gaze, but his voice remained calm. "I'm not defending him because of the uniform. I'm defending him because he's a human being who's being disrespected in front of a crowd. And that's not fairness. That's personal anger, disguised as justice." The words hit Olivia harder than expected. Her lips parted as though searching for a response, but nothing came. Meanwhile, Mr. Harris stood quietly, his weathered hands gently resting on the handle of his shopping cart. His military discount card still lay untouched on the counter. He wasn't angry, just tired. A mother holding her young son near the bakery aisle whispered, "This feels so wrong. Should we say something?" The man next to her shook his head slightly. "It's not our business. Let it play out." But Jake wasn't done. Turning toward the onlookers, he addressed the entire crowd now. "This isn't just about a discount. It's about how we treat each other. It's easy to criticize someone from a distance. But do you know why he has that discount? Because some of his friends never made it home." A few people shifted uncomfortably. An older man nearer the back nodded, his eyes narrowing with quiet agreement. Jake gestured toward Mr. Harris, his voice softer but carrying weight. "He didn't come here asking for special treatment. He's just trying to buy groceries like the rest of us. But the reason stores choose to offer these discounts is to say thank you, not for war, not for violence, but for the sacrifices that most of us will never have to make." Olivia's face paled. She opened her mouth as if to respond but faltered, the sharpness in her expression replaced with something closer to conflict. Mr. Harris finally spoke, his voice quiet yet firm. "Young lady, I don't expect you to understand everything I've seen, but I served, not because I wanted praise. I served so that people could have the freedom to question it, like you're doing right now. And I'd do it again, even if it meant standing here being insulted." The word struck like a hammer. Several shoppers exchanged quiet nods, and a few even whispered apologies under their breath. The tension remained, but something deeper had shifted, and yet Olivia wasn't quite ready to back down. The grocery store remained silent, the air thick with unspoken tension. Olivia's arms were no longer crossed, but her expression stayed tight, as if holding on to her frustration even as the weight of Mr. Harris's words lingered. The crowd watched closely, waiting for what would happen next. Mr. Harris, standing tall despite the visible lines of age and hardship etched into his face, slowly picked up his worn military discount card from the counter. His voice, calm but firm, broke the silence. "Miss, I'm not standing here asking for your approval," he said softly. "I don't expect you to understand everything I've been through. But what I do expect is basic decency. Toward me and toward every other person who has served this country." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Olivia blinked, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I never said you didn't deserve respect," she muttered, her voice quieter but still defensive. I don't see why veterans should get special treatment when so many other people struggle too." Mr. Harris nodded gently, his voice unwavering. "You're right. Struggles come in many forms. I've known that pain too. You see, I didn't come back from serving with applause in a parade. I came back to silence. The friends I lost didn't get discounts. They didn't get to come home at all. This card?" He held it up, the edges worn and frayed. "It's not a reward. It's a reminder, a way to honor those who never got the chance to walk into a store again." A hush fell over the crowd. A young father near the dairy section whispered to his wife, "That man has more dignity than anyone here right now." Jake, still standing nearby, nodded in quiet agreement, but Olivia, her voice softer now, shook her head. "It still doesn't feel fair," she said. "My cousin served too, and he's struggling with PTSD. No one gave him any special treatment when he needed it most." Mr. Harris's expression softened. "I'm so sorry for what your cousin's been through," he said sincerely. "I know many who carry invisible wounds long after they return home. The truth is, this discount won't heal those wounds. It won't bring back what was lost. But it's a small way for society to say, we remember, we care." Olivia looked down, her defiance slowly crumbling. She wasn't angry anymore. She was hurting. And for the first time, she listened. The crowd watched as Mr. Harris gently set his card back on the counter. His grace had diffused the conflict, but the emotional scars behind Olivia's words had yet to fully surface. The tension in the store had shifted but hadn't fully eased. Olivia's defensive posture softened, yet something deeper still simmered beneath the surface. Her face, pale and conflicted, revealed a battle between guilt and lingering frustration. She took a shaky breath, glancing at the curious eyes around her. The pressure made her double down. I'm sorry for what your friends went through, Olivia muttered, but her voice held a fragile edge. But how do discounts help? How does this make a difference for all the veterans who are still struggling right now? My cousin came home, broken. And this, she gestured at the card, didn't stop him from losing everything. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd, unsure whether to support her vulnerability or condemn her continued defiance. Jake, still watching closely, folded his arms. His face remained calm, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He could see this wasn't just defiance, it was pain. Mr. Harris met her gaze with kindness, his voice steady but tinged with sorrow. "Miss," he began softly, "I'm truly sorry for what your cousin has gone through. But this discount? It's not a solution. It's a gesture, a small way to say, we haven't forgotten you. I know it doesn't heal trauma. It doesn't erase the pain." Olivia blinked, her lips parting, but no words came. Mr. Harris continued, his voice unwavering. "When I came back from my second tour, there were no parades, no thank you speeches. Many of us came home to silence. And some of my friends? They never found peace. I lost more brothers to their own pain than I did in combat. So no, this card won't change that. But it's a reminder to those of us who are still here that we're not invisible." The crowd stirred. An older man near the back whispered, "He's right. People forget so easily." But Olivia, voice trembling, shook her head. It feels like no one cares. Not really. The system failed my cousin. It failed so many of them. And now we're supposed to act like a discount makes everything okay? Her voice cracked as the pain behind her words finally surfaced. Mr. Harris nodded, visibly moved but staying composed. "I agree, the system isn't perfect, but kindness matters, even in small ways. No one can undo the struggles your cousin faced, but we can choose how we treat those still standing in front of us. We can choose empathy over judgment." The crowd, once tense and uncomfortable, had grown somber and reflective. Jake, seeing the moment shift, finally stepped forward again. "Olivia," he said gently, "you're not wrong to be upset. But tonight, you've taken out your pain on someone who didn't deserve it." Her lips trembled as tears welled in her eyes, the weight of her actions finally pressing down. The room felt different now, still quiet but no longer tense. Something was beginning to break open. The tension in the air lingered, but it was different now. Olivia's voice had cracked, her defenses visibly weakening under the weight of Mr. Harris's grace. She stared down at the register, blinking back tears she clearly didn't want to shed in public. Jake, still standing nearby, could see that Olivia's pain wasn't born from defiance, but from personal wounds. He knew this wasn't just about a military discount, it was about something deeper. He cleared his throat and stepped forward, his voice calm yet steady. "Olivia," he said gently, "I don't think you're really angry at him." Her head snapped up, her expression defensive again. "What? You don't know me. You don't know what I've seen." Jake shook his head softly. "You're right, I don't know everything you've been through, but I've seen pain like yours before." The room was completely silent now, every pair of eyes fixed on Jake as he continued. "I lost my brother in Afghanistan," he said, his voice dipping lower but filled with quiet emotion. "He came back, but not whole. He fought his own battles long after the uniform came off. And the truth is, he didn't win." A soft gasp rippled through the crowd. Olivia blinked, her lips parting, clearly caught off guard by his honesty. Jake continued, voice unwavering. I know what it's like to feel forgotten, to feel angry at a world that didn't do enough. But this isn't about Mr. Harris. He didn't fail your cousin, and he didn't fail my brother. This is about how we choose to treat people. Right here, right now. Olivia's face crumpled slightly as she shook her head. But it's not fair. My cousin gave everything, and no one cared. He came home broken, and all people did was offer a pat on the back and forget him. That's why Jake gently interrupted, his voice still calm. And I felt that way too. But anger doesn't heal wounds. All it does is keep them open longer. Mr. Harris nodded quietly, the lines on his face deep with understanding. Jake took a step closer to Olivia, lowering his voice so only those nearby could hear. I know it hurts, but holding on to that pain and aiming it at someone like him, it won't bring your cousin peace. I promise you that. The emotional weight of the words seemed to break something in Olivia. Her shoulders slumped, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped her eyes. For the first time, she whispered, "I didn't mean to." Mr. Harris, still standing tall, gently placed his hand on the counter. His voice, soft but powerful, echoed through the hushed store. "Snap, miss, or you're not alone in this pain and you don't need to carry it alone anymore." The entire store remained frozen, watching as the walls Olivia had built around herself slowly began to crumble. The silence in the store lingered, heavier now but no longer tense, just raw. Olivia's face softened, the anger giving way to something far more fragile. Her hands shook slightly as she tried to steady her breath. Her voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper. "You don't understand. My cousin, Liam, he came back from deployment and he was never the same." The crowd listened intently, the once judgmental eyes now filled with quiet empathy. Olivia swallowed hard, struggling to speak. "He used to be so full of life. He loved playing guitar, teaching me songs when we were younger. But when he came back, it was like a part of him stayed overseas. He couldn't sleep. He barely talked to anyone. And the nightmares..." Her voice cracked as she blinked back tears. "He asked for help, but then the system just pushed him, through paperwork. He was drowning, and nobody was there to catch him." Jake nodded slowly, his face reflecting both empathy and personal pain. "I get it, Olivia. I really do. It feels like the people who deserve help the most are the ones forgotten." Olivia exhaled shakily. "I thought if I spoke up, if I said something, even in the wrong way, it might matter. Maybe someone would actually listen for once." Mr. Harris, who had been silently absorbing every word, finally spoke. "You speaking up does matter, Olivia, but how you do it matters too. I've been where your cousin was. I've watched friends fall apart not from what they saw out there, but from feeling invisible when they returned." His voice grew softer but even more powerful. "That's why I use this card. It's not about the money, it's about the reminder that people haven't forgotten us completely, that someone does care, even if it's small." Tears finally slipped down Olivia's cheeks. I'm so sorry. I wasn't really angry at you. I was angry at everything else. Mr. Harris gave a gentle nod. "I know, young lady, and you're braver than you think for sharing that." The emotional tension in the store had shifted completely. The crowd, once divided, now stood united in silent respect. Jake stepped forward, his voice steady but warm. "Olivia, your pain is real, but so is his. And what just happened here, this moment, it's how we start healing, by hearing each other." Olivia wiped her face, nodding, her walls fully down. The confrontation wasn't just ending. It was transforming into something healing. The tension that once gripped the store had completely dissolved. Where there had been conflict, Now there was understanding. Olivia, still tearful but calmer, stood behind the register with her gaze lowered. The weight of her apology and the emotional release had left her visibly shaken, but open, finally listening. Mr. Harris remained steady, the quiet dignity he had shown throughout now fully evident. His worn military discount card still rested on the counter, untouched. Jake, sensing the powerful shift in energy, took a deep breath and stepped forward once more. His voice, though calm, was filled with intention. "I'd like to do something," he said, reaching into his back pocket and pulling out his wallet. The crowd stirred slightly, watching with curiosity. Jake continued, his voice warm but steady. "Mr. Harris, you've shown all of us tonight what grace looks like. And Olivia, you've shown vulnerability most people never have the courage to express publicly. So tonight I'd like to pay for both of your groceries. Not because either of you needs it, but because kindness doesn't need a reason." The crowd remained silent, but this time, it wasn't discomfort. It was awe. Jake gently slid his card across the counter. "Please let me do this, not as a reward, but as a reminder that compassion has to start somewhere." Olivia's lips parted, her face flushing with emotion as she shook her head. "You don't have to do that. I don't deserve it." Jake's eyes softened. "Yes, you do. We all do. No one's perfect, Olivia. But the way you owned your pain tonight, it matters. And it's how healing begins." The register beeped as Jake finalized the payment. Olivia, overwhelmed, could barely whisper a thank you as the groceries were gently bagged. Mr. Harris finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Jake, I don't know what to say. This means more than you realize." Jake shook his head. "You've already said enough, sir. Your grace tonight taught everyone in this room a lesson we'll never forget." A ripple of applause began near the back, soft at first, then swelling as more guests joined in, not out of spectacle but genuine respect for the humanity they had just witnessed. The kindness of one person had changed the entire room. The sound of gentle applause filled the grocery store, not loud or dramatic but heartfelt. It wasn't just a reaction, it was a recognition of the emotional journey that had unfolded in front of everyone. Jake had stepped back, his act of kindness leaving a lasting imprint. Mr. Harris's groceries were bagged, paid for, yet the veteran remained still, as if reflecting on the profound shift in the room. Olivia, standing behind the register, was visibly overwhelmed. Her face was still damp with tears, and her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the bags on the counter. But this time her expression wasn't one of anger or defiance, it was quiet humility. The store manager, a middle-aged woman named Karen who had been watching silently from the customer service desk, finally stepped forward. Her heels clicked softly against the floor as she approached the counter, pausing beside Jake and Mr. Harris. She cleared her throat gently and the crowd quieted again. "I'd like to say something," Karen began, her voice calm but filled with authority. "What we just witnessed tonight, it's something this world doesn't see enough of. Grace, accountability, and healing." She turned to Olivia, her expression warm but firm. "Olivia, you showed courage today. Owning your mistakes publicly isn't easy. I'm proud of you for listening, truly listening, to someone else's pain." Olivia swallowed hard, nodding as fresh tears welled up in her eyes. Karen continued, her gaze shifting to Mr. Harris. "And Mr. Harris, you've reminded all of us tonight what real dignity looks like. You could have responded with anger or resentment, but instead you chose patience, understanding. That kind of strength doesn't just inspire, it teaches." The crowd murmured in agreement, nodding as Karen continued. "This store has always offered a veteran's discount, but after tonight I want to take it a step further. Starting today, we'll be launching a monthly donation drive supporting local veterans' mental health services. 'Cause words are powerful, but actions like what Jake did tonight, speak even louder." A stronger wave of applause followed. Some guests clapped with genuine warmth, others discreetly wiped their eyes. The moment felt more than just emotional. It felt transformative. Jake gave a humble nod, but it was Mr. Harris who finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," he said softly, "not just for this, but for reminding us all that kindness matters, even when it feels small. It matters." Olivia, her voice barely a whisper, added, I'm so sorry. To both of you. I let my pain speak louder than my heart." Jake responded gently, "And you grew tonight, Olivia. That's what matters most." The crowd's applause lingered just a little longer. The entire store changed, not just by words, but by the power of compassion and understanding. The emotional energy in the store had completely transformed. What had started as a heated confrontation had become a powerful moment of empathy and reflection. As the applause finally softened, the crowd lingered, unwilling to break the profound silence that followed. Mr. Harris, still holding his bagged groceries, turned to Olivia one last time. His voice, though steady, carried a gentle warmth. "You've shown more courage today than most people ever will, Olivia," he said. "It's easy to react, but to listen, to learn, that takes real strength." She nodded slowly, unable to speak, her face still reflecting the weight of everything that had unfolded. Jake stepped back, quietly observing the moment. His presence had shifted from being the one who intervened to a humble bystander, watching healing take place. The manager, Karen, spoke once more. "I think we can all agree tonight showed us what community really means: compassion, understanding, and accountability." But what happened next would leave the entire store in even deeper reflection. A young boy, no older than 8, stepped forward from the crowd. His small hand clutched a folded dollar bill. He walked up to Mr. Harris, his face serious with childlike sincerity. "Sir," the boy said softly, "my grandpa was in the army too. I want you to have this, to say thank you." Mr. Harris knelt down, his hands shaking as he accepted the crumpled bill. His voice cracked with emotion. "Thank you, young man. But I think you've already given me something much greater. Your respect." The boy's mother placed her hand on her son's shoulder, tears in her eyes. The crowd watched, deeply moved. The next day, a short cell phone video captured by a bystander that night began circulating online. The caption read, "A simple act of kindness at our local grocery store. This is how healing begins." Within hours, the video had gained thousands of shares. People commented not just about the confrontation, but the transformation. The way Mr. Harris handled that situation, pure grace. Olivia admitting her pain hit me hard. Sometimes we just need to be heard. Jake's kindness reminds us all doing the right thing can change everything. A week later, the store held its first donation drive for local veterans. Customers filled carts with essentials, food, toiletries, handwritten notes of encouragement. Olivia was the first to volunteer, proudly packing care bags for those who had served. And in a quiet corner of the store, Mr. Harris returned one evening, not to shop, but to shake Jake's hand and thank him, because kindness once shown never stops.